Laura, what are you doing?
Well, Henrique, given we're not going on holiday this year, I thought we'd create, I'd beat the vibes in the garden.
It's 6:30 in the morning. Chris Hatfield is coming for breakfast in bed. So get off the inflatable aubergine. I'll put on a holiday shirt and let's get started.
Okay.
Good morning.
Morning, how are we doing?
I'm good, thank you. Sorry for the wet hair. I was just going for a little swim. Took the day off. It's the hottest day of the year.
Morning, Chris. How you doing?
Morning, I'm good, how are you?
Look at our look at everyone in their tropical.
I love it.
Here. Right, well, thank you on this absolute scorcher of a day for jumping back in bed, because I think all of us want to be outside, but being willing to share your amazing insights with us. So you know the drill by now. We've got a few questions to ask, so I'm going to kick right off, if that's okay with you, Chris.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
So I think the first thing I want to talk to you about is that obviously you've got, a absolutely incredible podcast, but you also have a day job, which is in sales enablement. And I'd love to ask you, what do you see the future of sales enablement looking like?
I think there's two or three things for me that I'm seeing or I'm going to see. And I think, obviously what's happened with the pandemic is tragic in a lot of ways, but there's always opportunities at times like this to kind of see what can come out of it. And I think particularly in the world of sales enablement and training, it's pushed a lot of the evolution forward a lot more than where it needed to be, or where it was, I should say. I think from that, the first thing is how the content is delivered. I think, particularly with the generations coming up and how we consume information, people talking about an average attention span of like 8 seconds, which is why things like TikTok and Snapchat before that was so popular with people. But I think just how we consume information is changing and evolving, and I think people are becoming more comfortable with that and just realizing, do you know what, we don't need to be in a room for a whole day with people to be able to get them to learn something. If you look at this generation coming through now, if you want to learn something, you go on YouTube and you watch a 10-minute video. You don't go on a course, you don't go away and do something. And I think, the way that's going, I think that's how we need to be looking at with the future of salespeople coming in, and the people that are in this position now moving into leadership should be able to see that as well, is content needs to be more bite-sized and in a way that people can consume. So I think the length of it and the format of it, I think is really going to change. I think it needs to as well, rightly so, to give people that kind of more on-demand feeling. That's why Netflix have been so popular. You've seen some other people recently, John Barrows, I saw recently, has launched his version of this. It's like just providing that, just realizing, and that's the biggest thing. And I think the second thing is just where the focus is. I think one of the biggest challenges in sales is that people focus too much on the product, not the problem. And that's because when you come into a business, you're told everything about the business, what it does, what the product does. So of course, when you get on the phone to someone, you're going to go with what you know. Particularly if you're not confident in yourself, it's your first sales job sometimes, even if it's not, you're going to just talk about what you know. So if the point of the call is to find out what the customer's problem is and what their challenge is, shouldn't we be talking about that more from the start when we're developing people in inductions, in onboarding? So I think a lot more like customer centricity, customer first approach is something that we've adopted in Payment Sense, and something that I focus on when I work with my clients on the side as well, is how are you becoming more customer centric in everything you do with your onboarding, with your messaging, with your training. So for example, in your induction, can you have a customer come in once a month and talk to them about what it's like to go in the life of this person? Or, Henrique, you mentioned this in our podcast about getting someone to come in your QBR and talk about why they bought from us.
Yeah.
But I think if you get people to learn more about the world that they're selling in, first of all, it equips them a lot more to feel confident, because they never oversell the product then. They never oversell it, never talk about too much, because the customer doesn't care about what it is until they know how it's going to help them. So why not talk about that a bit more? So they're the sort of two things I think that are important in where we're going within sales enablement.
Love that. And what's interesting there is that probably even if you don't get an external customer in, there's probably someone within your business that does the role of who you're selling to just chew their ear off for a bit, understand their world.
Yeah,
exactly.
And Chris, do you think that in the world of sales enablement, are you going to see sales enablement teams or functions like the one that you the ones like the which you head up, kind of recommending more external content rather than creating your own content?
Yeah, I think that's so important because it can become quite insular sometimes within your business, within your organization, if all you're doing is training people on what you know, because everyone can develop. I can still learn and develop, everyone can. And I think if you're just doing from what you're thinking, you're only getting one perspective. And of course, the challenge with that is you might just be the best in the business, but are you the best in the market? Or not even just in the market or the vertical, but in the across the platforms, like in terms of who you look to whatever you're selling. So I think it is important to include external factors and realize, and I think some people's ego and pride maybe gets in the way of that, or thinking, if we're just using honest external content, are people going to see the value in what we're bringing?
Yeah.
And I think it's so important to realize, what people will, because they'll appreciate that there might be some things that are more specialist or general that they can get elsewhere, but when it becomes more bespoke and focused, that's what you're there for.
Changing gears slightly, I really enjoyed listening to your Sales Impact Academy presentation the other day on neuro-selling. I'm a big fan of understanding how the human body reacts to how we interact, right? And so on that presentation, you gave some really useful tips on how to remember what you call the 6 brain buying drivers. Is there a chance you could share with us like a really condensed version of that? And hopefully, I think you've got like a tip on how to remember those 6 as well.
Yeah, I have. So just to give people some context, neuro-selling is taking neuroscience and applying it to understand, not manipulate people, who your customers and even yourselves when you're selling. It's becoming more self-aware in that respect, because studies have shown that 90% of our decision-making process is subconscious, which comes from our primal brain, which is like the original brain that we had before we evolved as humans. And these are where the 6 buying drivers sit. So the statement, and I'll credit a friend of mine who helped me create this, so shout out to, his name's Andrew. A person feels different when they see a real elephant. A person feels different when they see a real elephant. So there's 6 things in there. The person, it needs to be personable. Your approach, your language, is it focused towards the customer or is it focused on yourself? And a really simple exercise to do with this is, once you're watching this, go on your LinkedIn profile, go through your previous emails, your video messaging. How much of I or we versus you or your are you putting in there? So for example, I've seen it so often, people say, I'd love to book a call with you. I'd love to arrange this with you. I'm sure you would love that, but the personal brain is what's in it for me?
Yeah.
So that's the first one. Feels, emotion. What I always say is, we buy with emotion and defend it with logical thinking. And the big thing about that is, when you're selling to a customer, you need to get them to feel something, not just know something. And it goes beyond that kind of like wants and needs, because often people don't know what they want or what they need. That's why they're coming to you a lot of the time, and they have this perception they think they do. But it's more about getting into, okay, why is it? What's the problem you're going to solve here, and what emotion are you going to solve here? Yeah. People buy for 2 reasons, either to relieve pain or achieve gain. So you've got to really tap into that, and particularly in this world of what's going on, being more remote as well, when you're selling, is that you need to really understand someone's pain points, because you're not going to be able to pick up on, might not be in front of them and all the stuff around the body language and get to meet all these people. You might not have the attention, so you need to understand through the questioning more effectively. So that's the second one. Feels different is contrast. So how contrastable are you being in your approach? And again, going back to where we've gone now, everyone is trying to sell online. Everyone's using email. Everyone's going through LinkedIn. There's so much noise in this world. Is how is your messaging standing out? And there's so much on this, but I think one thing to mention is around something called pattern interrupt, which is, interrupting a set of habitual behaviors to get someone to pay attention, because the brain will just go through the motions otherwise. So when you're speaking to people, how are you grabbing their attention, not just for the moment, but for the long run? People at the moment might be saying, come back in 6 months, we're not in a position to buy at the moment. But how are you getting their attention in that moment? So then the next 6 months, you can indirectly influence them from what they see on LinkedIn, on email, see your phone number. And it's linked to something called our RES, which is our reticular activation system, which is our own personal gatekeeper. It decides what it lets through. So for example, when we go and look for a new phone or a new car or something, and we start seeing it in the street or on billboards or online, we're like, what a coincidence. And it's like, it's not a coincidence. Your brain has just allowed that through the filter. So it's thinking, when we're doing that, how do we get through the filter? So an example I've used before is, For cold calls, I'll ring someone up and say, this is a sales call, do you want to hang up? And again, yeah, it gets the reaction. People laugh. It's like, what? Hang on a second. I can't just carry on typing. Have I just heard myself? Heard him right? And they show emotion as well, which again, talking about the emotion thing, it helps us connect with people. It helps us engage with them. You know, if you meet someone for the first time and you've never met them before at a party or something, or a networking event, and they make you laugh, instantly you think, I like this person, like, because they've made me laugh. They've given me some form of emotion from it. So that's contrast. So a person feels different when they see visual images are so important when we're selling, particularly, again, going back to being more remote now. We might not have the luxury of showing them what we want to show them, whether it's our product, whether it's an image, whether it's a video. We've got to be able to paint pictures. So visual images are processed about 60,000 times faster than auditory or text. So even though we're still using words, we can use stories and images in the customer's mind, in the prospect's mind. And one of the most powerful ways to do that is to say, imagine. Using the word imagine takes someone exactly where you want them to be in terms of what they're thinking or feeling.
Yeah.
If I said, imagine you riding a pink rhino right now in the desert, everyone's mind goes there.
Yeah.
You know, I don't, rather than saying, I want you to think about it, is like, imagine. And just because it's a great way to paint a picture. And you've got to think about that when you're selling is, are you just talking about your product or service in a standalone, or are you creating a story out of it? Imagine your team at home right now, all of them working remotely. Imagine this is happening. How's that feeling? And it's, you don't actually have to say that, but that's what you're trying to get from them, is that emotion sort of feel. You know, everyone's working on their own right now, struggling. People might be putting things in differently onto the computer. What do you think that's, and they're just sort of thinking, oh God, that's making me a bit anxious. Yeah. But, you know, so that's the side of things with visual, with painting pictures. And then, so a person feels different when they see a real, tangible. How are you making your product or service tangible? And a great way to do this is to use numbers and facts or figures. You might not always have, like, you know, ROI percentages, but just to quantify things and give people something easy to understand. So if you've gone through like a really long sentence or talking about something, can you summarize it in a metaphor? Can you make it for something to understand? So if I'm trying to sell something that's like a one-stop shop, I could say it's like a Swiss Army knife. And instantly they know what a Swiss Army knife is. Everyone's seen one. They might not know what my product or service is, but they can link it to that. And if they can understand that, I can then educate them on why it's like that at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's finding, particularly when you're selling to people in a new market that might be not familiar with your product or have it already, your service, how do you bring something into the world that's familiar? Which is a familiar surprise, which is a whole other topic as well.
Yeah.
And then the elephant part is being memorable. So our primal brains will only store information that's memorable. And it's been proven that we are 22 times more likely to store something if it's told through a story, the messaging, than just in a standalone format. So when we're creating stories, it's important to go back to the imagine piece as well, but to also have a clear, definitive sort of beginning, middle, and end. That's why I remember them so well, because they have a clear beginning, middle, and end. And also they create emotion because we can relate to them in some way. So with the story piece, it's about how's my beginning and end going to really impact someone. There was a George Lucas quote which said the key to a great film is to have a hard opening and a hard close and just not screw up in the middle. So it's about how do you impact someone from the off, and then how do you leave them with something. But when we look at selling sometimes, whether it's a demo or a pitch, we often leave all the good stuff for the middle. Yeah. And the brain often isn't engaged in that part. There's ways we can do that, but how do you bring some of that in the middle? It's going to make someone pay attention. That's going to make someone go, oh, you know, I was part of a team that I was working with a few years ago, and they went to pitch a Formula One team. And their opening line was, this is how we're going to make your car go 2 seconds faster. And it was just a piece of radio equipment, which had nothing to do with the car, but it linked to it. And straight away, someone's like, wow, okay, I need to pay attention to this. Like, this could be the difference between second or first or second or third. So it's like, how do you build that into like your openings and your closes as well to make someone go, right, this is different. I like this. So that in a nutshell is the 6 key brain buying drivers. A bit of a tongue tangler when you try and say it quickly. A person feels different when they see a real elephant.
I mean, you and your sales career, you've always sworn by you know, if you don't remember the entire presentation, at least rehearse the opening and have a really strong executive summary, right? And you've always done that, Laura. You've brought everything to the front.
Yeah.
Because I've, you know, in 12 years together, I've sat for a lot of pitch rehearsals. And the pitch rehearsal for her really is just like the 3 or 4 minutes at the start, right?
Yeah.
Particularly with what's going on right now, you aren't always going to have someone, you're not going to have someone in the room at the moment.
Yeah.
So someone's attention span can waver, particularly if you've got 3 or 4 people on there. Someone might not turn their video on, and therefore, how are you going to get them engaged? They might be looking at other things. They might be like looking outside. You haven't got them in a room. So how are you going to make it more memorable? And that's the way to do it, is to capture someone's attention from the off. And then even just at the end, if they haven't been listening all the way through, what are 3 things that they're going to be able to remember, which links to something called chunking, which is important as well, as how you chunk information together.
I'm going to ask you, Chris, because I'm sure you must know the science behind this, but I think in selling, we often talk about the power of 3. You know, today I'm going to tell you these 3 things to summarize these 3 things. And it's always the power of 3. Why is it 3?
Because so chunking theory has been proven through studies. We're more likely to, we break bits of information up into 3 to 5 parts is how we can remember. That's how our brain stores things. So if I ask you to, Henrique, read out your mobile number.
079 5. And I'll stop there.
So what you've done there, you've probably broken it up to 3 or 4 chunks.
Yeah.
So you say it, and when someone reads it back to you, they say it in a different way, and you're like, hang on, that doesn't sound right. It's this. It's the same number, but it's chunked in a different way.
Oh my God, that's so true. I was doing my number in my head and I say it in 3 segments.
Yeah. So that's how we store information. That's why it's so easy to remember. Our brain can't remember the whole 11 numbers in one go. It has to break it up. And that's why when we're talking about things that, you know, whether it's on a slide deck, have we just got 3 points, whether it's in a summary, have we got 3 points? Because, you know, if we try and tell someone everything, they won't remember anything.
And Chris, I have to ask, the world of neuroscience, neuro-selling, it does take me to the relevance of emotional intelligence. How do you see neuro-selling being a driver in and of its own right to help people develop their emotional quotient, their EQ as we call it?
There's 2 things linked to it, and it's another thing as well called AQ, adaptability quotient. So, and what links to this is EQ. Everything when you look around selling, what makes someone successful comes from the rational part of the brain, like how creative they are, like all their conscious thoughts goes into what makes them good at selling. Their unconscious stuff obviously brings that into it. But the problem is when we get into a state of stress or anxiety and under pressure, our primal brain can hijack our rational brain, like our amygdala in our primal brain can go off, which causes all that IQ and that to sort of disappear. So it doesn't matter how good you are at selling, if your AQ isn't up to stand in terms of adaptability, which we've proven recently with what's been going on. You know, you might have thought, oh, do you know what, these people are great at selling, but as soon as it gets a bit tough, they just crumble. Is because their AQ isn't where it needs to be. So I think there's 2 things here, and I think it's important, you know, when we're developing people, is that we're not just developing their sales skills in general, we're developing their adaptability skills, their resilience, their grit. You know, and I think, you know, Ollie Sharper, you're very good friends with Henrique, mentioned a great point on this on the podcast is, you know, when you're developing, how to develop someone's resilience is how you deal with negativity and losses in business. And, you know, it's finding that balance when it doesn't go right, is to reflect on it, not give them a hard time, but not just make them think, oh, it's nothing. It's okay, how do we move forward from this? Because I think it's just getting people to learn in those scenarios. Yeah. So that's sort of a side note, but I think how neuroselling and EQ is becoming more and more important is because prospects' IQ is being raised more and more. There's more and more information available. People know more about what they're buying than they did before, because they can go out and they can research it, and they're often down a certain part of the route before they even get to you. So it's not so much about what you tell them that's going to sort of capture their attention anymore. I think it's just how you connect with them. And I think someone's EQ and how they're able to be empathetic and self-aware and read where the prospect's at and find a way to sort of match what's going on to them is going to matter more than thinking, oh, I can just tell them all this great stuff about our product and they're going to be amazed by it.
So have you got any tips around how can you, in your recruitment process, almost test this adaptability?
So this might seem a bit harsh to people watching this, but you can give them a scenario to prepare for, and then you can just change it up. You know, you can say, right, prepare a presentation for 15 minutes. It comes in, right, the projector's broken. What are you going to do? I think just doing something like that and just seeing how someone reacts to it, or just asking them questions. So it's great asking scenarios, but why not put them in one?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I call it the swan effect. You want to be like absolutely serene and calm on top of the water, but underneath your legs are going like crazy. And we've all had those moments where presentations aren't working or whatever, and you just have to try and keep cool as a cucumber.
Yeah.
Frantically stressing out to get the presentation to show on the screen.
Yeah. Or you could say to them, you know, 15 minutes in advance, they get there and say, sorry, I've only got 5 minutes now.
Oh.
So how do you condense that down?
Yeah.
Because that, again, that's, you know, fact sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have one last observation and question, which is the following. If you look at both of our videos, you will see that on the top of our bed, we have a picture of a ballerina. On the top of Chris's bed, there's a very friendly, maybe not, tiger, super focused. What's the story behind that tiger? If you don't mind my asking and sharing with our listeners.
No, of course. I think, I mean, I'm a big fan of tigers, first of all. I just think for what they represent, they quite like, it's very aligned. I think subconsciously, I didn't realize at the time when I got it, but sort of more I look at it, is just their kind of like focus, and they're quite like, they look quite calm on the outside, but they can be fierce when they're focused on something. That's the biggest thing, really. And it just sort of inspires me. I'm very like fueled by ambition. I never want to sort of just settle. I want to keep developing. It's not saying I'm never happy, but I'm never content. I never let myself get complacent with things. And I think, you know, that kind of just reminds me my inner tiger.
I love it. What does the ballerina inspire you on?
Yeah.
Today, you know, come on.
Well, I obviously didn't pick this. You can see that probably if I was single or like weren't married to you, I probably wouldn't have a ballerina. But perhaps you can share, Laura, because I haven't got a frigging clue.
Everyone knows I used to be a ballet dancer, so I went from ballet to business, pirouette to pitching. So we won't go into that. But yeah, I'm enjoying the contrast between our two bedrooms, with us with our pink silky cushions and ballerina, you with your blue and the tiger.
Yeah, and my Chinese zodiac, Chris, is tiger, so I'm like totally there. Yeah.
There we go. Mine's dragon.
Love it. Oh, well, Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure, as always. You are just a plethora of information in that mind of yours. And I think this is going to be an awesome episode for people to listen to. And I think we will all certainly remember that a person feels different when they see a real elephant.
Thank you, guys. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks for having me.